Anyone else? Okay, hearing none, I'll move forward with the meeting. Now, this process started back in 2012 when a notice of contamination was filed with Mass DEP. The city of Greenfield was dealing with a defunct property owner who ultimately went into bankruptcy. The city of Greenfield started working with DEP to deal with the problems at the site. DEP came in and played an active role, which is rather unusual, in assisting with the initial site analysis and cleanup. Subsequently, we came onto the scene. When I say we, 401 Liberty LLC, sometime in 2013, we learned of the site. There was a request for proposals that was put out. As I understand it, we were the only bidder for obvious reasons. This was a vacant site at the time the city took control of it that had potential to cause problems for sites located around it. The Mass DEP worked with the city to start to deal with some of the processes to understand environmental impact. We were ultimately named the successful bidder through the RFP for Liberty Street, and we became an active participant in the process with DEP. Either shortly before we were named the successful bidder, or shortly after, we began attending meetings and working in a cooperative fashion with the city of Greenfield, Mass DEP, and the federal branch of environmental protection, the EPA, became involved. EPA, in cooperation with DEP, actively came out to the site and remediated over 1,400 tons of contaminants from the site, performed testing at neighboring sites to determine if there was risk to surrounding properties, and played an active role, which is somewhat unusual. In response to this PIP that's been filed, there have been numerous inquiries to Mass DEP. In an effort to clarify some of the initial questions, Mass DEP, and the specific individual is Elizabeth Steinhardt, drafted a letter and sent it to one of the lead petitioners, Glenn Ayers, dated January 21st, 2022. I hope that if you haven't seen it, you'll take the time to find this letter after today's PIP meeting, because it outlines many of the central questions that have been asked repetitively. And I'd like to spend just a couple minutes on that because it goes into the historical context of how we got to where we are. The goal for 401 Liberty Street was to come in as a private entity to work cooperatively with the city to remediate the site, to get it to a functional level so it can be put back on the tax rolls and be developed for use. At the time, Franklin County had one of the highest opiate death rates in the state per capita, without one treatment facility in the area. We had developed a path to develop substance abuse centers, social service networks to try to assist with some of these problems that were plaguing the community. This process, as you may imagine, we have approximately 100,000 square foot vacant complex consisting of approximately 11 acres, two condominium units, at least two condominium units, one of which was still owned by another private entity, and an empty parcel of field. The property was divided up. The city was able to build a ball field. Part of our commitment to the city was assisting that and giving money and time developing a mini-family park, which has occurred on a site adjoining what is now known as 298 Federal Street. The second part of 298 Federal Street is Unit A. Unit A consists of now the DTA facility and CSO, which is something that was not owned by the city at any time during this process. So I'm going to focus on Unit B, and then at times I'll talk about in Unit A. For purposes of this discussion, Unit A, there have been no contaminants found in Unit A. There is no remedial action taking place on Unit A, and it's really not a focus of this shouldn't be a focus of this conversation, although at the end, we're happy to address any concerns. As I told you, the Mass DEP laid out in this letter dated January 21st, and it talks a little bit about some of the things I've summarized for you. But what it also talks about is their Mass DEP's understanding of the progress, the remediation that's taking place. Now, it's kind of important to just take a step back for a minute. We're looking at an 11-year period of time that the city has been actively, aggressively working on this site. The city, as a non-contributing owner of a property, has certain protections under Mass General Law 21E and different statutes, which I won't get into this point, as does 401 Liberty Street as a tenant in possession. Both parties have worked to get this to a stage where we can get to a final completion, if you will. Now, preliminarily, and Bruce will explain in more detail, I'm going to give you just an overview of what's occurred. Testing has occurred in the residential neighbors, downgrading of the site. There's been extensive testing by EPA, DEP, and O'Reilly and Talbot and Oken. There have been questions about how the company of O'Reilly, Talbot and Oken got involved in this site, who they work for, what their role is. Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 21E, describes the process by which private LSP licensed site professionals are entrusted with the obligations of dealing with contaminated sites. O'Reilly and Talbot Oken is a well-respected entity that works statewide and beyond. They had been working with LUNT Silversmith, the prior owner of the property, on the site. When the city took control, the city retained O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oken to assist them with their remediation and understanding the scope of it. And when we became the successful RFP, the city's request was, could we use a common LSP for two reasons. One, not to have duplicative efforts, and two, obviously for cost reasons. We agreed to use O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oken. There was a prior LSP on the site before Bruce Nicholson, who would worked for many years, who since left the company, and Bruce has now been involved for quite some period of time. So that hopefully answered some of those questions about the parties, their roles, how O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oken is involved in this, and what the role of the licensed site professional is. Now, what has transpired going back a bit is the remediation we talked about with DEP and EPA, which is the removal of contaminants. Now, why is that important? It's important for two reasons. Number one, those are the contaminants from which any environmental contaminants may migrate from. So it's important to remove over 1,400 tons is a sizable amount that was removed. In addition to that, EPA did their own testing. So this is beyond a private LSP, O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oken, and went and determined the source of migration from the site, where it went to, the levels in the surrounding properties, air quality in the buildings, and things of that nature. Following up on that, we continued to plot a chart, and for those of you, some of you are very familiar with environmental conditions. For those of you who aren't, when you start a process, there's no clear path you take. You try to understand the scope and magnitude, both geographically, wide, depth, and the type of contaminants to see how best to attack them. That's the process that O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oken, 401 Liberty, and the city have taken together over a number of years. 401 Liberty's involvement has been 8+ years, going back, as I said, to 2013, and the city's 11. Now, there are 4 major areas that we've identified, which are common to the questions that have been asked, which I think will hopefully shed a lot of light to some of the, what I would say, misconception that people have, many of which were preliminarily addressed by DEP in the letter dated January 21st, 2022, which again is extremely important because it does 2 things. Number one, it's independent regulatory bodies opining on it. But number 2, it corroborates what O'Reilly and Talbot and Oaken have been doing, and it's in line with the path that we've taken, both the city and our consultant. Now, the first of the concerns is the air quality concerns, and we'll come back to talk about air quality within the buildings. When we started off, there were approximately 7 buildings on this 11+ acre site. And I'm using approximate, so just for discussion purposes, there was approximately 6.6 acres that was deeded out for the park. The remaining property stayed with Unit A and B. Unit B being owned by the city, Unit A being owned by a private entity at the time, LUNT Silversmith. At the time, there were approximately 7 buildings, plus or minus. As you now see the site, there's several that have been demolished or removed for a whole variety of reasons, including environmental reasons, but more importantly, flow of the site, commercial viability of the site, and to make it attractive to the surrounding area. The air quality aspect will be addressed, and within that context, we'll address active versus passive systems, why one might be preferable over another, why a particular one was used in this site, and what the thought process is with that. The goal here, again, is to try to provide information to hopefully alleviate any concerns and address specific questions. The next one is the soil contamination, which is separate and distinct, and we're talking about the actual dirt in the ground, which is important, and to understand how the soil contamination has been dealt with, what the soil contamination is now, and how we plan to deal with it going forward with the use of an activity use limitation, which is a vehicle that is authorized by Chapter 21A, which is something that's recorded in the Registry of Deeds, which puts limitations not only on the owner of the property, but on tenants and all people who come in contact with that property. So, for example, if your AUL restricts the use of the property to only commercial, you cannot put residential. If it restricts it in some other manner, you cannot violate that now or in the future unless the condition is remediated. And that's something that gets recorded with the deed. It conveys from one owner to another, and it's something that has severe penalties if, in fact, you don't comply with the requirements. It's also something that's audited by DEP on a regular basis, oftentimes a few years after the AUL is in place, and then there's periodic checks. Now, I use the word audited, and I want to dispel what I believe to be sometimes the misconception that an audit is something negative. In this particular scenario, we've worked in partnership with EPA and DEP, which means there's been full transparency. In fact, we've consulted them on most of the things we've done before we've done them. And before we received this PIP application, in preparation for filing an AUL and our final remediation closure plan, if you will, we went to DEP and asked them to review our plan, to provide input, and to be actively involved. As is common with DEP, they often don't do that because they have a number of things, and they figure they'll deal with it in the review process, which is otherwise known as an audit. I think you're all familiar now. A review process is being undergone, is ongoing, by DEP, which is something we couldn't be more pleased about, because it gives us it gives us guidance in 2 ways. Number one, affirmation that the way we're approaching it is correct, and that it's something that is in compliance with both the law and the CMRs, which is the Code of Mass Regulations, which is really the underlying operative laws, if you will, that people have to follow. And number two, if there are additional things we need to do, we'll take those steps and deal with them. This same process, for understanding how we went about doing, is a process that we did in a Springfield site for a very similar use that was done over, I want to say 15 years ago, also a substance abuse facility. It was done again after this site in another location in Springfield, and again went through 4 sets of environmental teams because it was sold subsequently through the process. Both sites were audited by DEP. Both sites came back compliant. And to date, there's never been one risk issue to any occupant, tenant, or other person on either of the sites. Similarly, in Greenfield, we've had no claim of any occupant, tenant, passerby, or any adverse condition affecting anyone, which delves into the fourth issue. The third issue is the neighboring properties. I talked about the soil. So the next issue is the neighboring properties and whether or not there's a potential in the future for problems there. I'm going to give you a layperson's generic answer to that. And DEP has already put it in their letter, as EPA has also opined. The source, the majority of the source that generated the contaminants has been removed. The migration of contaminants is caught in a catch basin and dissipates before it has any impact going through the catch basins. There have been no tests in any of the neighboring properties that would suggest that there has been any ongoing mitigation. And I will let Bruce talk in more detail in regard to that. That gives you, I think, a little bit of an overview of what we're going to discuss here today. I also want to talk about the process for a moment. So our goal here today is again to provide information, listen to concerns, and answer questions. As coming through. I don't know if everybody could just mute. I don't know if you have things on mute. That might help with that static. Can you all hear still? Men's the men's, yeah. Okay.
It's too staticky.
It seems to have just gone. I just want to talk for a little bit about the process. So there'll be a 20-day comment period after this. Anyone who has additional questions, the same questions, is welcome. We've provided in the initial letter an email, an address. Feel free to communicate those however you want. We will include those in our PIP response. We will answer each question individually in writing, as we're required to do. And that's something that can take place after this meeting today. So some of you may want to listen and hear and maybe grasp what we're saying. Some of you may want to actively participate. That's up to each one of you how you want to proceed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for a minute. With me is another attorney from my office, Sam Prickett, who is going to walk us through the four major areas, 3 to 4, depending on how you break them up, along with Bruce. And Bruce, I don't see your name on there, but I know you're on. So I just, for my, just confirm you're on this call.
I'm on.
Okay. All right.
Just muted. I'm going to mute.
Okay. So Bruce, again, is our licensed site professional. And I'm going to turn it over for a minute to Sam and Bruce to walk through with you some more specifics and get into a little bit of data, because some of this becomes very technical. So rather than me confuse myself and everybody, I'll allow the expert to talk about it. So with that, Sam or Bruce, whoever wants to kick it off.
I can kick it off, very shortly to summarize the 4 issues that we, identified from my conversations with some of the petitioners, some of the counselors, as being, I would say, just a high-level summary of the largest concerns that people had that were most prevalent, throughout all the conversations that I had with other folks. Number 1 being the air quality concerns and levels of TCE reported specifically on the Phase 2 environmental report put out by O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oken. Secondly, being the difference between active and passive systems for controlling the levels of TCE in the air inside the site. And why one was originally discussed and a different one was then used. Thirdly, being soil contamination.
Sam, you have a little bit of feedback.
What is being done about it.
Sam, you have a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure. Try talking now.
Sorry, do I still have some feedback?
Yeah, I think that's a little better.
I hear you clearly.
It might be because we're in the same thing. So, okay.
Okay. Thirdly, being soil contamination. the amount of contamination, where the contamination is the contamination spreading in the soil? What has been done about it, what needs to be done about it, etc. And finally, the migration of TCE in the groundwater, or other contaminants in the groundwater. Are those leaving the property? Are they migrating off property? Are they affecting properties outside of 298 federal? So with that summary, I'll turn it over to Bruce to kind of go into more specifics regarding those issues.
Thanks, Sam. And yeah, anybody who's not, probably anybody should mute who's not. That'll help with the feedback. The first question that air quality concerns the indoor air, and there's tables in the phase 2 report that shows that what we call exposure point concentration, which are essentially an average after we install these subslab systems, or the system below the floor. We go through a year of indoor air testing, and we need to see seasonal changes. Typically, wintertime, you expect to have the worst case conditions because everything's closed up. But you also want to see spring and fall, and you get an average concentration, which we call an exposure point concentration. And it was pointed out that these are at times above residential and even above commercial threshold values. So if you look at a table in the phase 2, you'll see on the right-hand side the average, the EPC, and then these threshold values. It's important to note that the threshold values are not standards set by EPA or DEP. They're considered screening values that indicative that a LSP needs to pay attention and evaluate what's going on with those concentrations. So the actual calculation of exposure risk based on the concentrations, the EPCs, are complex, but the risk characterization in the phase 2 report, and I'll give you specific page notations, pages 620 to 622 of the risk characterization. That's an appendix J of the report, has these calculations, and then table 14, page 680, has a summary of these. And if we look at table 14, we can see that risk assessment shows that what's called the hazard index, the HI, and the excess lifetime cancer risk, the ELCR values, are below Mass DEP's requirements for indoor air inhalation of vapors in the residential rooms and in the offices of the buildings. So that's a very important point. I know there's been talk about residential versus commercial, but we actually meet residential indoor air concentrations and can document a condition of no significant risk for inhalation exposures in the buildings. And residential risk assumes a resident would be in the building 24/7, 365 days a year for 30 years. That's not the exposure we're dealing with in the building, but it, as I said, we meet that criteria. If you look at that table 14, which says summaries.
Bruce, if I can stop you there for a minute, I just want to make clear to everyone. So you're saying that the air quality within the buildings meets the residential standard, is that correct?
Yes, in the residential rooms and even in the in some of the offices, it meets residential standards. Yes.
So could you explain, because I think it's something that's commonly either not misunderstood or not known, what is meant by protective versus preventative in the requirements of Mass DEP as they relate to that? And specifically, I'm talking about air quality.
Protective versus preventative.
Yes.
I mean, I guess I'm not following you, Rayford.
Well, you're saying that it meets the residential standard, correct? Air quality.
Yeah, our hazard indices are below the residential standard. Yes.
Well, many of the questions we've had is the difference between the belief that the air quality meets a standard other than residential. And you're telling us the report and the filings of DEP demonstrate that it meets a residential level within all buildings in which need to be tested, correct?
Yeah, and the if people want to see that in text, they would look to page 620 to 622, and that risk characterization, and that has a summary of the cancer and the non-cancer risks, and speaks to inhalation risk. That table 14, also shows that EPC calculations for soil contamination exceed Mass DEP standards. So these are typically metals and some TCE in soil. So that's evaluating possible ingestion of soil. And that shows that, it exceeds the Mass DEP risk-based standards. And so that's why we're talking about having an AUL in place as part of the permanent solution that would limit excavation or control any excavation if it were to take place, and disturbance of the soil. And the AUL also speaks to, protecting or maintaining those subslab systems. What needs to be done to make sure that those are intact and continuing to function as they should.
Can you explain some of the assumptions that you make when you're determining the type of soil, the contaminants in the soil? In other words, what's to be assumed? Is it to be assumed that someone touches it, digests it? What are the assumptions that you look at when you're evaluating?
It has to be ingestion, which is assumes for a resident assumes a person ages 1 to 30 years old, 5 days a week, 30 weeks a year, actually ingesting a certain amount of soil from the property, 100 milligrams per day, something like that. So it also covers possible uptake by vegetables, so that the resident could have a vegetable a vegetable garden, and we wouldn't want residential growing of vegetables in the soil at the property. It's most of the soils are under pavement, and the AUL would require a soil management plan if you're going to do excavation and construction. Does that cover that? Should we talk about active versus passive systems?
Yeah, I think keep presenting and
Okay, all right. There was a question about an active versus passive. Why was early on? I think perhaps people saw that it would be an active system. An active system meaning a system that's got pumps, air pumps to move the air through. So pipe underneath the floor slab and pumps to pull the air out. And I guess I'd say that we knew this would be a challenge here. We knew we needed to control the indoor air. We didn't know exactly how we would do it. There are a number of ways to do it. And at this property, very shallow groundwater. So a standard, active system similar to a radon system, if any of you have those in your homes or seen that, pipe below floor and pumps to pull air out, creating negative pressure below the floor, and to prevent radon or any volatile compound from getting into the indoor air. Here we had very shallow groundwater, and if you create a trench, put your pipe in it, and then create pipes to the up to the roof line, you can't have that fill up with water. It's not going to function. So here, the entire floor of Unit B, the basement, there's a basement there. The entire floor was covered with about a foot of gravel, very, very porous gravel. So it's not soil that is tend to be less porous, but it's actually very porous gravel, 6-inch pipe, and then that pipe up through a number of vertical pipes that goes up to the roof. And so that keeps it above the water table. And because it's so porous, instead of being soil, it's so porous because of all the open pores between this crushed gravel. We found that it could operate passively, and we didn't have to have pumps to move the air. So I guess I'd say, that was the innovative solution to what's a pretty tough site. But the entire floor of a Unit B covered with this crushed stone, and so now the basement is really, just fairly not very tall. It's about 4 feet tall because they had to add this level above the basement floor.
So Bruce, just as alternatives, if I understand what you're saying at the outset, you look at possibilities. Would it be active or passive? Active, the perception is more effective, which in reality is not necessarily the truth. And here, the passive system was hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least substantially more, 10 times more than an active system, which would have been an easier, cheaper solution. Including removing the entire concrete floor of the basement, dredging down, putting in this filler, putting a new sealant floor over it with multiple vents going up through the roof line, which was substantially more expensive. Do you feel that the passive system is performing better than an active system would have performed?
Well, yes, because I don't think we could have really installed an active system in a trench. I just don't think there's a reason for an active system, and I like that this operates, without if you lose power, this system still functions. I like that. It's convective flow, and it's.
Let's follow up on that point, because some of the questions that we've been receiving is, well, why not have a belt and suspenders approach here? Why not put an active system on top of a passive system? And would there be any discernible benefit? Is that something you could even guess at this point? What are your thoughts on that?
I guess I just don't know that it would improve things. I think, we're talking about, yes, we can measure, we've measured TCE in the indoor air, but we're talking about parts per trillion, parts per billion concentrations, very low concentrations. I don't know that it would improve it.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Since it's already compliant with the Chapter 21E and the CMRs as far as residential level, isn't it fair to say that there are hundreds and hundreds of buildings like this out there that comply with the residential level that are at a zero? In fact, it's very rare something to be at a zero. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I think you usually, when you run it, you want to get to no significant risk, and I think it's probably unusual to get to absolutely nothing. It's just a function of, laboratories, they keep lowering and lowering what they can see, their detection limits, and now we can see down to parts per billion.
It's fair to say that you've achieved no significant risk at the property. It's been that way for a number of years.
Yes, that's true.
Now, another question that's been asked is there a need for more air testing? Is there any regulatory requirement for more air testing at that site?
Not following, DEP guidance. DEP has a very lengthy guidance document on how we assess and remediate and regulate sites like this, where what we call vapor intrusion is a potential issue. And so they've got a very prescribed method of evaluating whether the system is functioning. And after you go through the testing that you do, and the year's worth of testing, and we, in this case, we did 2 of our sampling rounds during winter heating conditions, and another one in the spring and another one in the fall. After you go through that and show that you're at no significant risk, you you've got to maintain the system, so it's controlled within AUL. If there's, inspected annually. But if there are no changes to it, no, you don't do additional testing. The system is doing its job.
And I know I've thrown a bunch of questions at you, so I apologize for that. I'm just trying to narrow it in. I know a few people have a 5:30 deadline, so I'm trying to be cognizant of time. Maybe now go to the next issue. You started to talk about soil. Why don't you talk about soil a little bit more as it relates to third-party sites?
Okay. Well, soil. We could control the soil contamination by. It was really EPA who did a lot of. If you've seen the figures in the phase 2, you'll see there's a swarm of testing locations, and they really identified 2 major areas with the highest concentrations of metals and also TCE. And then a few other spots around the site. Most of them were below. They have these air controlling units that were taking dust out of the air, and the soil below those were also had higher metals concentration. So they excavated those areas. That's at a site like this. That's really what you do. You go after your real hotspots or your highest areas, but the rest of the area, you really look to control it with something like what we're doing, or an activity and use limitation. It's lesser concentrations that are around the property. You typically wouldn't remove all the topsoil. It's just not really feasible to think you're gonna do something like that at a property like this. You control it with an activity and use limitation.
And how about in relation to it, any of it potentially contaminating a neighboring property?
Well, no. So metals are not tend not to be tend to stay where they are. They don't tend to be water soluble and move in groundwater. We don't have a metals issue in groundwater out here. It's the soil is related to the manufacturing areas, and those are the areas that were the worst places were addressed, and the rest, as I've said, is dealt with through limiting exposures.
Okay, and there were a couple other questions in regards to the tenant or the users. It's fair to say that at the time this was done, the tenants were notified of the condition of the property, the plans, and how we were proceeding with it, both by your office and otherwise, correct?
Yeah, indoor air sampling results were given to the tenants. They were very busy, and I don't think it was their primary concern, but we did pass them on.
Okay. And in regards to, and I'm trying to just incorporate as many of the questions that came in regards to the thought process of how we move forward. There's one thing that DEP put specifically, and I just want to focus because they put it in bold language in their letter under paragraph 7, and they said that the residential dwelling does not mean a structure with transient use such as a hotel or hospital. And they talk about MCP definition of a residential dwelling is as follows, and gives it. Can you explain what that is, what the distinction is, and what that means in this context?
I guess a residential setting has the highest potential exposure. They have the lowest standards, but when we look at exposures, we do sort of divide them into residential and commercial industrial, and this clearly falls in the commercial realm, and it's the definition I mean, the closest thing you could think of is a hospital, I suppose. But we looked at, there are people that are coming and working for, this is where they work, but they're not residents here. And then there are people that come for a shorter period of time, but they might be here 24/7. But that doesn't constitute a residential use based on the regulations that we're following.
Which is both the regulations of the Mass DEP, the MCP, as well as we also dealt with the town zoning laws as they relate to the type of use. So it coincides with both use requirements, correct?
Okay. Actually, I'm not second part. I'm not.
The second part's not your part, but it's a question that was asked. So I think I'm adding the legal side on that side, and you give the environmental side from MCP. I think that would, and Bruce, unless you have something else specific, maybe we can take questions first from elected officials who I know have other public meetings, and then we can open up to others if there's anything that they would like to ask, and then we can come back and give further comment.
There was one other thing about migration, like TCE migration.
Please. You can comment on it, Bruce.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think I talked about soil, metals in soil, but there's TCE in groundwater, and if you've seen figures from the phase 2, there's what we call a plume. So dissolved TCE in groundwater that moves towards, is it Norwood Street? The street to the, I believe it's to the south. And that gets intercepted by the sewer system, the stormwater sewer system. And so that actually serves as a sink. And when we test the catch basins running down the street, we did find low concentrations of TCE in the stormwater. We trace that to its discharge point into the river, and we find that the TCE concentrations drop as we from catch basin to catch basin to the point where it dissipates before it gets to the river. I think that's a combination of probably some volatilization, but also dilution. Other catch basins or I guess groundwater doesn't have the TCE is entering that sewer, and other arms of the storm sewer are joining, and so we don't have TCE in that stormwater by the time it gets a mile or so downstream, and that really prevents TCE from flowing across the street. And we have monitoring wells on the far side of the street that have nothing in it. They're no TCE, and that's proof that we don't see this crossing the street.
And with the benefit, I know this PIP is unusual in its timing. It's coming, almost 11 years after the beginning of the remediation efforts. Do you have the benefit of hindsight now that you would expect to see migration if there were going to be a problem?
I guess I don't. I mean, it was, I think DEP actually talks about it in their letter a bit.
On page 2 and 3, it's question 4, the response.
Yeah, it was, when we were earlier asking them to comment, it was something that I was curious their thoughts were on this. We've certainly known, we've known of this mechanism for, a number of years, that's what was happening. It's clear that that's what's happening. As a hydrogeologist, we can see that that's what's going on. And maybe it's fortuitous, however you want to say it, but that's what's going on here.
I guess to say it another way, Bruce, the end result is based upon all the data, all the testing, it's clear that there are no TCEs moving or contaminating any other neighboring site since the efforts of EPA and DEP back in 2000. I think it was 14, if I remember correctly. It might have been 15.
Yeah. This is a mature plume. I don't see things changing, and those letters that EPA provided that I think the homeowners that said, there's not an issue here for you to be concerned about. I think those are still viable and still apply.
That's what I meant by hindsight. Mature. I probably shouldn't. I didn't use the proper term, mature plume, but
Okay.
that's essentially what I was getting at. Okay. Is there anything else at this point, or should we allow? I know it's getting close to 5. Allow some of the elected officials who have other commitments to ask any questions they may have. Bruce,
Are you asking me? Sorry.
I said, is there anything else you want to add at this point?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't believe there is.
All right. And I'm not sure. I apologize. Those of you who are elected officials have other commitments. Just someone, if you have a question, please ask it, and just let me know who you are, so we can. Please say your name, so that we know each. We understand who's talking.
I'm Councilor DeSorger. I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So I just heard Mr. Nicholson say that he didn't feel as if there was migration of TCE. The monitoring wells, 101 and 104 on Kenwood Street, have actually increased between 150 and 240%. They were tested in 2013 and 2019. One is opposite Unit C, and the other is further down towards the ball fields.
Are you referring to something in the phase 2 that you can tell him the page so that he can respond? Where are you getting this data from? If you can cite the source,
his
then he can
phase
respond.
could his phase 2 report.
Right. What page?
I'm sorry, I don't have the page. I have it printed out,
Okay.
and I don't have the page number in front of me.
Wells?
But monitoring well 104 in 2013, it was 19,000 micrograms of.
We can pull up the
Okay.
report because
Okay,
looking at
you can pull it up.
data doesn't give you the conclusion you're asking. So I'm just trying to give Bruce the information he needs so he can respond. So
Okay.
What monitoring well 104, is that the only well? Or is there another one?
No, there were 2, monitoring well 101 and 104. Actually, if you look on, I think I referred to that with Attorney Pritchard. He would be able to help us with that.
Well, yeah.
He's on the line, and
Right, he's on the line, but you didn't. If you could give it to us already, because we would like to address it to Bruce so he could answer you. Bruce, if you're able to go on the report, Bruce, and tell me the answer. If it's going to take you a while, let's take another question. We'll come back to that one, and we can address it in writing now that we understand.
Bruce and Rafer and Councilor DeSorga, I believe she's looking at page 627, possibly 624 to 627.
Okay.
thank you, Attorney Pritchard.
627. Okay.
And while he's looking for that, I had another question about when the occupation of the initial occupation of BHN, the first unit. This was, and I can actually hold this report up for Mr. Nicholson so that he'll know what it is. It is your release abatement measure. It was dated April 29th of 2016. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unless someone's got better eyes than me, what's the date on it? I can't see that.
Okay, April 29th of 2016. It was a 24-page report done by Mr.
And
Nicholson.
what's the title of it?
It's a release abatement measure plan. It was a plan in which he delineated how he was going to put in an active system, but I'm just going to go to this. In written correspondence within this plan, you notified the mayor, the Board of Health, and the Mass DEP of your plan to install an SSDS and thoroughly test the air quality of the Franklin Recovery Center prior to occupancy. That did not happen. Did you ever notify the Board of Health or the DEP that you were opening a residential treatment center prior to doing the safety testing you had outlined and that is required per MCP vapor intrusion guidelines? And I asked this, I believe I asked that of Attorney Pritchard, who authorized the opening of the Franklin Recovery Center in early July of 2016 before the vapor intrusion pathway was eliminated and before any indoor air testing was completed. After you did that indoor air testing after the unit was fully occupied, you indeed did have to fill out a 2-hour IRA to the Mass DEP because the level was so high in certain areas.
Are you asking a question? I'm just trying to understand.
I'm talking, and I did ask, I asked a couple of questions.
I know, that's why I'm just trying to break them down so you can answer them.
Okay, sorry, okay.
So the first one is, your question is, you have this April 29th, 2016 report, and
Yes.
you're asking why passive, are you asking why a passive not an active? Is that the first question?
No, I'm asking about the occupancy of that facility prior to any testing.
Okay.
You sent all kinds of notifications to the mayor, the Mass DEP, and the Board of Health saying that this active system was going to be installed and that everything was going to be checked prior to occupancy, and that was not what happened.
I don't know that I agree with you, but I'll let Bruce, this is in response, Bruce, to why is it that occupants are allowed and as testing is going on? And if you could explain the process of how many times you have to take a test and under what conditions in order to comply with the DEP requirements. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay. I'll say that, this, it's difficult in cases like this, when there's a construction project going on, doors are open, construction workers are going in and out, there are no windows in the building. It's very difficult to test the indoor air under those circumstances. And then when you get the building constructed, you can't really just leave it. You've got to go through a year's worth of testing to show that your system is doing its job. You can't really just leave it vacant and it's not in use. It really needs to be in use. The levels that we have were.
Well, Bruce, let me stop you for explain why it needs to be in use, about people coming and going, how the air temperature changes, what impacts it have, so people understand it.
You want the building to be in use for its intended use. You want the HVAC systems to be operating. You want it to be being used as it would be used when people are there. So you can't really do the testing that's really representative of its use until it's being used. And yes, there was TCE in the indoor air. They were not at imminent hazard concentrations. They were at part per billion concentrations. When the building was starting to be occupied, we tested. I went to DEP. I sat with the head of emergency response, Dave Slowick, and said, this could be an imminent hazard. We've got these indoor air concentrations. We'd like to declare a IRA condition so that we can, do this installation as an IRA, and that's what they thought made sense. They weren't particularly concerned. At the concentrations we're talking about, long-term exposures that we worry about, not just a matter of, a few weeks or something like that. So, it's just the way these things are done. You perform your testing while it's being used for its intended use, and unless it's Unless it's a true imminent hazard condition, you go about, the continued use. I pulled up, getting back to I think the question on the monitoring wells is that the wells that Counselor is talking about are on the side of the street where that groundwater is being intercepted by the sewer system, not on the south side of Kenwood Street. I'm looking at, she mentioned, I think, monitoring well 104 and 100, and those are both wells that are on the upstream side of that stormwater system. We may have early on used the term subslab depressurization system, or getting back to that concern. But I guess I'd say again, we knew we had to control the indoor air. We didn't know exactly how we were going to do it. I knew that shallow groundwater was going to be a challenge. I'm very pleased with what was done out there. And I think if you look at that DEP letter, you'll see that they're not they're not concerned about it either. But I mean, I guess we'll wait for an audit from them to see that. But I guess there's a formal audit. I should say that anytime there's an activity and use limitation, the DEP audits sites. So the fact that they're planning on an audit is not anything surprising to us.
Counselor, is there other questions that we didn't answer or he didn't answer? I apologize. I just want to make sure we're addressing your concerns.
So you agreed that the monitoring wells were higher, that they had increased dramatically, but you're not concerned about migration.
Well,
Because it appeared to me that the DEP was concerned about that.
Right. Before you answer that, I'm just going to, Bruce, and I know we all commonly use adjectives, but she used the word dramatically. So why don't you look at the data and you tell us what your thoughts are on if there's an increase and what it means, if anything, to this project.
Tell me which page that is again.
She had it on pages 624, between 624 and 627 is what we were told. I have it here on mine. I'm not sure if this is the right one. I'm on 6, but my computer's a little different. I'm 633. So
Raphael, it's Phil, Counselor Elmer.
yes,
I think if you look at page 65, which is the big pink plume map,
okay.
you can see monitoring well 104 is there's a box for it. Do you see that sort of right in the middle of the plume?
Yeah, I see 104.
Yeah, so there's 3 numbers there. I don't know what they mean. Maybe you could explain them.
Those are concentrations of TCE. And when I look at these, I look at sort of order of magnitude numbers, and that's a big number for TCE. But looking across the street, we don't have it, and that's part of the evidence that it's getting into the sewer system. Now, 104, you see a 19,000, then you see an 890, and then you get 45,000. I don't know why the 890 is so low, honestly. At times, if a well is, these things are at grade, they have seals at the surface, but the seals sometimes, get hit by a snowplow. If rainwater had gotten in and it was diluted, that could explain that low number. But the change from 19,000 to 45,000, that's the same order of magnitude, and so that's not significant to me. But it's a big number. I mean, look at LS19 next to it. It goes from 107,000, and then we've got 2 rounds that are 2 orders of magnitude less, 3,400, 2,700. But we're within the TCE plume in those wells, and we've got TCE there.
I just to try to keep things in order here. The first counselor, the shortness, excuse me, I don't want to mispronounce. Is that resolve or at least address your questions? And then we can go to Counselor Elmer. I guess he has some questions. Is that acceptable?
You can go to Council Elmer, you can come back to me.
Okay. Counselor, did you have any other follow-up questions at this time? Or?
I did.
Okay.
Full disclosure, you and I had a telephone chat a few days ago, and I asked you. You made it pretty clear that you didn't want to spend any money building anything that the EPA didn't require you to build, and I was trying to make the case that, you know, if you could do something that would make the air safer, and it didn't cost too much, would you consider it?
I'm going to disagree with you because what I did say is I said I would consider anything after I received the audit, and then I said we could discuss it, and it may make some sense, it may not, but I wouldn't make a decision on that prior to the audit findings. That's what I said.
Fair enough. That's accurate. Just to clarify what an audit means, this is the DEP going over the data that we're looking at here, right? They're not doing any more air testing.
They could.
They
could.
They might. I've had cases where they've come out to a site
Yeah.
and they bring their own sample canister and they want to see what they get.
They've done that on our other sites. They've gone out and double checked monitoring wells and things of that nature. So that's completely their purview. We can't talk to that. I can only tell you the regulation allows them to do that, and that's in their purview.
Would it be inappropriate for you, given the concerns that have been raised, to invite the DEP to do some monitoring, some air monitoring? Because it hasn't been monitored for 3 years, right?
But that's a very common thing because of the protocol, because the levels are so low that doesn't require further in the makeup of it. If they feel that it does, they're going to do it. And I can tell you that I don't know if I'm not sure if everybody's on at the beginning at the outset, but I want to make it very clear. We went to DEP with all of our information last summer, and we said, "Here's our information." We'd ask for an internal review before we move forward on this because we knew that there was sensitive issues to people, and their response was, and I can't speak for DEP. I think they have they're doing a lot, and it's common for them to do it during an audit. They determined to do it that way. But they accelerated their audit in light of all the calls and the letters that were coming in. So I think that we're very comfortable with the process. We're willing to comply with whatever we have to do. We want a safe site. I've told you we've been doing this for a long time in a lot of these sites, and we'll do whatever is necessary to meet requirements. And many times we'll be beyond. Quite frankly, we spent a couple $100,000 on that floor when we could have tried to do some other much cheaper site. I mean, mechanism use, but this was something very innovative that we were fortunate to have a team with Bruce and the other people there that we were able to brainstorm and put this system in place, and it's worked remarkably. I mean, I think the data demonstrates that. So my answer to your question is, when we receive the response back, we can make some decisions then. I'm not adverse to it. I'm not against it, but I guess I don't want to rush a process. I want to see, what they say. It's like, it's not, I want to impress upon all of you, this is something, and I didn't spend a lot of time on the front end, but we're extremely proud of the work we've done there in 8 years. I mean, we filled a site that was vacant, that would have been there for a long time. And we've overcome incredible obstacles, keeping public safety number one, occupant safety on site. There, we have a very good working relationship. By the way, many physicians and well-educated people are in these buildings, are aware of these issues, and this is something that we try to work in a cooperative fashion with the city. I think we've done a tremendous job. So I don't want that to get lost in the process. Somehow we're trying to rush something. This is 8 years in.
Fair
to
enough.
say something.
I'm sorry.
I'm Councilor Bottomley.
Hi, Councilor. How are you?
And I would like to make a statement because I know a lot of people send in very detailed questions which have not been answered here. I'm not surprised to hear that you say everything is fine. I'm concerned it ignores multiple experts that we've consulted that have reached very different conclusions. I think you've created a very pleasant fictional narrative and downplayed the significance of TCE exposure. I don't find the LSP credible. I find your facts to be selective, and I'm looking forward to you answering some specific questions. We have a lot of people on the line that have a lot more knowledge than me. And I also believe you have a conflict of interest by running this meeting, considering you're looking to purchase and run this property. So that's my statement for you. Thank you.
Okay, so let me address the statement / question. There is no conflict. I couldn't perceive what it is. This meeting is being run publicly, being recorded, and being run pursuant to the regulations. We're openly answering any question that's asked. I understand that you may have a different view of it, and we're trying to address the questions that have been put to us, and there's a number of the people that will ask questions, and we'll deal with them. But to make broad statements that lack factual foundations, you have a conflict. It just doesn't serve, in my view, a good purpose. You have a right to do it. I respect that. But I also have a right to respond. And I assume this doesn't require any more of our time. So I'll go to the next person who has questions, whomever that may be. Yes, you're muted.
I just wanted to finish my question.
Sure.
I had asked you because we had heard expert opinion that the passive system could be made into an active system, a more effective active system with a relatively inexpensive, cut the pipe, put a fan in, that part relatively inexpensive, but then it involved monitoring for many years. We understand that. I asked you whether you'd be willing to take a look at what it would cost to do that.
I did do that.
Are you able to do that?
I have been, and we think the magnitude. I think you were correct. You had, I think you told me 20 to 30,000, somewhere in that magnitude. We think that's probably a proper appropriate amount.
Per year?
No,
for the
no,
whole thing?
20 to 30,000. Well, if they fail, you have to replace them. That's a rough estimate, and then you would replace them if and when they fail, and you do the monitoring of it. That I guess it goes into the next question that you and I discussed, and it's kind of circular because I said, we'll look at this, we'll get the audit back, and we'll determine if there's a measured return of something, maybe we can consider. But and just so everybody's clear, I said to you, and I'll say it to everybody, let's get everybody's input. Let's understand what DEP is saying. Let's understand what everybody's trying to drive at. And if we can find reasonable solutions that work for all, then it's something we're very reasonable people. We want to be in compliance.
If I could just direct a quick
Yeah.
engineering question to Bruce Nicholson. The high groundwater level seemed to you an insurmountable problem in terms of putting in an active system. Have I got that right?
I'd say that the system that you would normally put if you didn't have the high groundwater would be you would cut a trench below the basement floor and put your pipe in that, and that wasn't doable with the high groundwater. So
one expert said that was actually the high groundwater could have been diverted, and that it would have been possible to put an active system, and that might still be possible to turn the passive into active. And then I'm going to stop asking questions. Thank you.
I diverted. I guess I can't respond to experts without knowing who I'm talking to. I mean, I guess so. You would. I guess I disagree with that. You would dewater the site. You would pump groundwater to lower the groundwater table, and then put in your active system.
No, I'm not sure. I thought it was just a matter of trenches.
So the water's got to go somewhere. So to me, it's impressive to have the entire floor of this covered with gravel and a layer on top of it and pipe that vents it, and it's all happens using convection, not pumps. It's an impressive system, and looking at the numbers we've got, I don't know, people are stuck on active versus passive, but I mean, I like that you're not relying on pumps to move the air.
I understand.
In
Thank you.
interest of time, why don't we go, I don't mean to cut you off, Counselor. I just figured we'd go to another topic. Okay, thank you. Is there someone else who has a question?
I have a question.
Yes. I'm sorry, identify who you are, please.
I'm Marianne Bullock. I'm the city councilor for Precinct 5.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi. I have two questions actually that don't really center on the like specific TCEs and the remediation and that process, but I work with a program through DPH and through Bay State Health. And so I work directly with many people who have spent time both in detox and stabilization at the LUNT site. And I'm wondering two things. I'm wondering what is considered long-term exposure? What is the length of exposure that would be considered long-term? And then my other question is that you'd said earlier that you don't want to rush the process. You know, I'm wondering why not at this point go above and beyond for the health and safety of occupants and workers? I personally have worked with pregnant women who have done many 30-day plus stays there. The nature of addiction is chronic. And so there's many people in our community who have spent much time in those buildings since they opened, which was, you know, it was very useful to this community to have a detox here. For many years, I worked in substance use and recovery, and we didn't have a detox here. And so we were happy when that changed, that people didn't have to go far from their family. But my main concern is really that we're saying this isn't a residential program. Okay. But what is considered long-term exposure? Because we do have many people, specifically people who are pregnant and postpartum, who are spending long stints of time in that building.
Bruce, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, for air exposures, I mean, residential exposure is what I think I said earlier, 24/7, 365 days a year for 30 years. And we found that the residential that we're no significant risk for that inhalation exposure. So at the concentrations we've got, using the toxicity data that is available to us, we don't have significant risk of exposure at the concentrations that we see. I hope that answers your question. It was a two-part question. I think that maybe I answered the
Yeah,
you
you
answered
answered
the
first
second
one.
part was, I think, more directed at 401 Liberty. And I think at this point, it's not about rushing the process, but we would defer to the regulatory agency and till their findings come back. We have a well-respected team here that have done their work. I think the city and 401 have relied upon that. And we'll get those findings back. We're talking a very short period of time. They're hoping to have it back, this isn't a year out or 6 months. So I think that in light of 11 years, we're trying to keep our minds open and work in a cooperative fashion with, both the elected officials and the neighbors. I mean, we've tried to be a good neighbor and we want to be a good neighbor going forward.
Does that answer your?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question, please, and make a public comment. This is Glenn Ayers.
Okay.
Thank you. So far, my feeling about this meeting is that it is a sham, and this is not a meeting to discuss the public involvement plan. This has been a meeting where you've been trying to do whatever you're doing. I have no idea what it is, but it is not a meeting to discuss the public involvement plan. And so I do not consider this to be a legitimate meeting to discuss the public involvement plan, which is what is required by the regulations. The second thing I would like the public involvement plan to address is how to replace the current LSP and hire someone who the community has confidence in, because we have no confidence in the current LSP. The phase 2 for this project was done in 2012. It recommended putting in an active subslab depressurization system, a groundwater collection and treatment system. There were cost estimates, preliminary cost estimates for those things. Those two things were included as a lease condition in the lease for this property, and they still are a condition of the lease. Neither of those things have ever been installed. The passive system is passive, and it does something, but it is not adequate. The goal of this entire thing should be zero exposure. Zero exposure equals zero risk. What you're doing is intentionally exposing people because you're failing to put in adequate controls on this property. You're not controlling the groundwater contamination, although this LSP is somehow claiming that a storm drain is functioning that way. That is completely absurd. That is the most ridiculous thing possible, to have a professional provide that kind of an opinion. This site has not been adequately investigated. It has not had a thorough assessment done, especially of the dense, non-aqueous phase liquid contaminants that go down through the groundwater until they hit a confining layer. That has not been adequately investigated. There is no discussion of where the contaminants that are creating that plume are originating from, because if you have a plume, that means you have dense, non-aqueous liquid that is below that is contributing to that plume. And that plume is not being controlled right now. It is continuing to migrate. It is continuing to contaminate the buildings, and none of this is being done properly. The phase 3 should have been done in late 2012 or 2013. It was never done, and yet this LSP has asked for a 6-month extension to prepare a phase 3 that should have been done 9 or 10 years ago. We have no confidence in this LSP, and we want to know how to bring someone in who will actually do the job that needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Okay, I understand you made a statement. Is there a specific question though that you want us to answer?
Yes. What is the process for bringing in a new LSP on this project?
Okay. At this point, there is no process for that.
I'll say that the phase 2 you're talking about, there's some confusion there, and it's unfortunate the term is used in both the Massachusetts contingency plan and the real estate community, but a phase 2 can be when you're evaluating a property, you might do what we call a phase 1, which just for a real estate transactional purpose, and that would just be history and background and no subsurface evaluation. And then a phase 2 usually entails some level of a subsurface investigation. Within the MCP, a phase 1 is the initial site assessment. It includes some degree of soil and groundwater testing. I think that was done in 2017 or 2018. You tier classify based on that. And then you go to your phase 2 comprehensive site investigation. So there was no need to do what you were thinking of as a phase 3 back in 2011 or whatever the date you mentioned. So it's different terms.
Okay. Assuming there are no more questions.
I would like to ask a
quick question,
question.
Yeah, sorry,
My
Kate.
name is Susan Morgaftic. I'm in a putter.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. My backyard connects to backyards that are on Kenwood Street.
Okay.
I have dug
Can you tell me
down
your
in my
address?
yard.
Because I might know it by the street address.
I'm on Forest Avenue. I'm on Forest Avenue. Okay. In dealing with some things in my yard, we have dug down, around 3 feet. There is water, and I'm not just talking about a pool. It's a gushing stream that is underneath our houses here. I do not understand how the assumption can be made that all the TCE is being captured in the storm drains, knowing what I know about the quality of the water flow that is directly underneath my house, and that goes I know through a number of backyards here. And my concern in part is that I grow vegetables in that yard, and I am trying to figure out, is this water that is very close to the roots of those vegetables contaminated, and is it hurting us? And I would like something that explains how that has been clarified, and how that water is clean, because I don't understand. I can't do, the storm drain in front of my house gets a little bit of that water, but a whole lot of that water comes through without hitting the storm drain at all. So that is a question that I would really like. I know that questions that are put through in this meeting have to be responded to, and I would really like that responded to. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm happy to respond to you, Susan. I think you had sent in a letter to the Republican, or what is it, the local paper, asking that question. And I saw that,
That's correct.
and I wondered where you live. Now, I'm looking at the figure in the report, and are you either 45, 43, or 37?
45.
Okay, so you were tested. You're one of the houses that were tested. The indoor air was tested, and
Correct.
there's a monitoring well directly in front of your house, MW 114. It was tested in 2013, and it contained no TCE. And there's a monitoring well on the upgradient side, so groundwater flows from Kenwood Street towards Forest Avenue. So monitoring well 108 on the upgradient side in Kenwood Street is also non-detect, no TCE, no contamination found in it. So the groundwater from 108, monitoring well 108, flows towards your house. And so based on that testing, no, you don't have any solvent, any TCE in your groundwater. I know groundwater is shallow here, but doesn't have anything to do with, that's a natural condition.
I guess what I'm asking is 2013 is 9 years ago. And and it seems that there are things that have happened with this building since 2013 in terms of just the construction that's gone on and other things. And I want to know that this has been tested since. And I have not, and I don't have that. I have not been given that information. And I don't think my neighbors who have been given that information.
We tested some of those wells, the available wells, I believe in 2019. They contain, they're similar, they contain nothing in them as well. When you're looking at groundwater plumes and hydrogeology, this is a mature plume. It's not a moving plume where it's advancing. I'm comfortable that data is still valid. I don't believe we need another test there to show that you now have TCE there or anything like that.
Can I ask why it would not be worthwhile, from your perspective, to do some other testing? Just to, I'm not here so that I can yell at you. I'm here because I'm concerned. And why would it not be appropriate to do some more recent testing and let the community know what is happening? Because, as I said, I have the report. It's that I got in 2013. I have not seen anything since. And we start hearing that there are other issues that have come up, and we don't know. So why is it not appropriate for there to be recent testing that could set a lot of minds at ease, both in terms of the indoor air quality in the building and in terms of the groundwater?
I guess I'd say conditions are stable, and as a scientist, hydrogeologist, when I get a well where there's non-detect, I usually that's good enough. Some of these wells have been sampled a couple of times, but that sampling that was done in 2013 was really trying to define the extent of the problem. It was part of figuring out what was going on out there.
For the record, because I know that the questions that are brought up in this meeting must be considered by the DEP. I am requesting that there be testing done during this period of time to let us know that indeed the things that you found are still true. And that's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you. There was
I have a quick question as well.
I'm sorry, who's talking?
Hi, Carissa Clifford. I'm a petitioner that hasn't been interviewed.
Okay.
So Mr. Pellegrino, you represent 401 Liberty, is that correct?
Yes. Well,
So
in terms of this
you
meeting,
can,
the
so you
city,
can-
the city of Greenfield is a joint PIP presentation between the city of Greenfield.
yeah, that's this, but you get paid by 401 Liberty. So my question is, so you can speak on their behalf, is that correct?
Depends on what it is. I can't speak freely on every issue, but I can speak. quite a bit.
They want to be good neighbors, and I think that's a good idea. Will they be agreeable to throwing in some air testing cans? Can we see what the results are?
Well, that's
What
been
is the
done, and I'm
harm-
going to
what's
give
the
the same
harm in that?
response that we gave before to. I apologize.
This is more like a hearing. You're like a defense attorney. This is not good. You're not convincing us. There's no reason to not get some testing.
Okay, Ms. Clifford, my job is not to convince you. My job is I'm trying to answer your question. I'm saying when the audit's coming back soon, we'll see what the requirements are. I said we have an open mind. Maybe it's testing. Maybe it's the other request about adding and trying to add an active
But
system.
you don't
These
live
are all things
here.
where this is
We
discussion, not
want
a commitment.
testing. We
I'm
want
sorry.
numbers. We want numbers.
Okay,
We want
I understand. I understand your request.
The DEP, the LSP gives the DEP information. We're requesting an audit because we're not trusting what the LSP. I'm sorry, Mr. Nicholson, we're not trusting what you're saying. There's very selective information that's being given. There's absolutely no reason why we can't get some testing. If it's a money issue, I don't know what the problem is, but this is just us doing our due diligence.
Which
Please get
is
the air
fine.
tested.
We
Please get
understand
the
that.
water tested. That's all I have to say. It shouldn't even be an argument. This is being good neighbors.
Okay.
But thank you for your time.
I have one last question. I have to go to my Ways and Means meeting, but the Kenwood Building, Unit C, the indoor air testing was the indoor air testing was in the central and in the northeast, but not in the southwest, the southwestern part of the building, where the highest readings were with the plume. So if we were repeating the indoor air testing, I would like it done all throughout that building because that's where it's the highest. And I'm going to log off and leave my fellow counselors and fellow citizens to be watching the rest of this because I have another meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm just a concerned citizen. My name is Pamela Goodwin,
Okay.
and I'm 73. And I recently went into the DTA office. I was pleased that it was opened back up. And I didn't have to be there too long because she just made copies and said the governor hasn't allowed us to have a sit down with anybody. So it's limited use. But as a citizen in this city, with all that I have heard from the counselors in town, from everything else, I have to state on the record, I am only briefly in that office. If I had to take all my paperwork and over to Staples and try to fax it to somebody, I wouldn't have been happy. I don't work there. I'm not housed there. I don't have an office in that building. If I did, I would say I'm not coming back in until people really assure me that I'm not catching cancer. And I say that as a person who has survived 3 types of cancer in my tired old body. And I don't understand why this is so hard. As the previous speaker said, just be a good neighbor. Spend a little money. If something happened in 2012 or 13, we are 2022, and we are like begging for people to be concerned. And I'm done.
Thank you. Your name's not on. I see the hand you have up there. You have your hand up in the air.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my name doesn't show up?
Now it just says
Wendy
City of
Goodman.
Greenfield.
No worries, sorry. Wendy Goodman.
Yeah.
I guess what I would like an answer to is where the barrier is to doing testing. Just a simple answer. I mean, we've been hearing everybody asking for it, so I'm curious where the resistance to doing that is, because I haven't heard that from you.
I've said it a number of times. There's not a resistance. It's not where the purpose of this meeting is to understand the concerns. We have an audit that's coming out in the very near future. We'll have insight into that and be able to take a look at it and determine what additional steps, if any, we'll take. I mean, we're not against it. As I told Councilor Elmer, I believe it is. I told him, he was talking about adding an active system. I said, we're not necessarily against it. I said, but let's get the feedback from the regulatory agency. Let's understand it. Let's see what the thought process is. Then we can make these decisions.
Okay,
I think we're being very reasonable.
That makes sense to me. So what would be the next step of our involvement in that decision-making process? That makes sense that you need to do some more work, but when that decision comes down, how do we get?
So there's a 20-day period following this where additional comments can come in. We obviously have 2 steps, minimum of 2 more steps, aside from completing the PIP process and answering questions, which is very involved. And there may be feedback when we get additional in response to what's talked about here today. We have to file an AUL at some point, and then we would file for final completion. But the feedback from DEP would probably make sense to have that before we took some of those steps. So, and that's why we deferred. We could have filed the AUL before today. We didn't, because we wanted to get input from all of the concerned people, understand it, include it in what our thought process is, include it in AUL if and when we're ready to file that. So we're trying. You got to remember, this came at 11th hour, and we're absolutely willing to try to consider all options.
So, and I appreciate that. So what I'm looking at is I'm hearing a lot of concern. I'm amongst them, but I'm hearing a lot of concern for people that are directly affected, that want to know that they're being heard in your decision-making process. So I hear you deferring that decision, which makes total sense to me. But when you come back to make a decision, I think what we would like is that you come back to us and we get to say yay or nay and pursue a process if we're not satisfied with what your decision is. I'm not hearing that there's another avenue for us to take once you make that decision.
Well, that would be included in our response, what our plan is, and you'd be able to see it all and then take whatever steps. Maybe we do more things. Maybe we do all the things you're asking. I can't, I think, you have these questions for 11 years. We don't hear from anyone. Everybody comes about now and wants these additional things. And we're saying, yeah, we're actively working on them. We've met with our LSP and his team. We've vetted through some of the questions that we actively went out and talked to hours and hours of time. Sam has spoken with people to get the questions. We've put them all down. We plan on responding to every single one of them, providing them. We're trying to be as transparent as we can.
And I'm not arguing with that. I'm not in a place of distrusting what you're saying. All I'm asking for is you're saying that you're not making a decision based on the input here. I think what we would like is the
I'm not making a decision
opportunity.
at this moment. And I can't make that
Fair
decision.
enough, fair enough. I misspoke. I
Yeah.
misspoke. I
Yeah, no, I
misspoke.
just want to be clear about that because
Right. I guess the concern that I hear is, so if the decision that gets made is against what people are asking for, is against testing, what other possibility do we have to make sure that we have a voice? Because you're deferring it now.
Well, I think that, look, I can't advise you on what, that's not my role, but what I can say is DEP is actively involved in this, and they're the regulatory people who are entrusted with protecting all of us, myself included. So I think we have to have some faith in what they're going to tell us. Maybe they say, hey, you need some more testing. Maybe they say, no, we don't, and maybe we decide to do it on our own. I can't, you're asking me to make a decision on something I don't have the information yet. I can't do that.
No, I'm asking for a process that is inclusive in this study, and that's what I'm hearing.
Right.
This doesn't feel inclusive. It feels perfunctory that you're asking for input, but then you're going to go ahead and do what you need to do.
I guess
What I'm asking for is a process piece that continues to include people. That's
Agreed.
all.
And we have established a site at the Greenfield Library, which the notice will go out with all of the documents. We plan on providing our draft PIP to everybody in this who signed up to comment back on, which would include, if it doesn't include a testing, to say, hey, we want testing. And those are all things we have to follow DEP, and they weigh in on their side, and we collectively make a decision. This isn't us against the neighborhood. I mean, we're landowners too, potential, and we want it to be a clean site as well. We've done everything that our LSP and the team has told us to do, and we're willing to do more. But we have to do it in a very methodical fashion and understand, okay, we've done 8 years of work. Now let DEP tell us what their thoughts are. Maybe we missed something. I don't know. Maybe they say you did a great job. Maybe they say, you know what, we need some more testing here, or we want you to put an active system. We don't know what that outcome is, but we are actively answering questions, incorporating into our plan, and we plan on incorporating it. And maybe we do incorporate the testing. I mean, this is there's different areas of testing. We have a lot of wells. I think what I've heard today, the concentration of, there's 2 areas. Abutters in a very defined area are asking for additional testing. And then you have the air quality in that one specific building, which I'm hearing. Those are the 2 main things I'm hearing, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure I accurately have it.
Yeah, you forgot the DNAPL, dense non-aqueous liquid phase, TCE, that's at the bottom of the water. You haven't addressed that, and neither has your LSP. That's Glen Ayers.
Okay, I'm sorry, say it again, please.
Yeah, you have never properly identified the source of the contamination, the dense non-aqueous liquid phase, TCE, and other chlorinated solvents that go right down through the water table. They do not dissolve completely, and they form pools of contamination, and that's what's leading to this contaminant plume that's on site. And you do not want to do the adequate testing to identify where that material is, and it must be done. You can't do a phase 3 until you do the proper site investigation.
And I'm very confident that if you're correct, DP is going to tell us that in their audit, which we're going to have in a very near future. So I think it's kind of chicken and the egg, where I have to rely upon. I'm not a scientist. I rely upon them. They tell us what we need to do. We authorize it. I can tell you that we've never not authorized an action that's requested, and we want to be in compliance with all regulatory and laws, and that's what we're doing. And if there's extra steps we've taken, I think we have taken extra steps already. That we don't have to just get into, but we've done that. So I hear what you're saying in regards to the source of it, and that's something that certainly will be addressed both through this format and with DEP. I mean, I think we're very fortunate, all of us, in the sense that normally a PIP process starts at the beginning and DEP doesn't get involved for years later. So there's there's a regulatory body actively engaged.
We're very close to the beginning of this process.
If you just identify whoever's speaking, is that?
Yep, this is Glenn Ayers. We have not finished the site investigation. We're very early in this process. We have not come in late on this process. We are very early in the process, much less than halfway through. The phase 3 has not been done. There has been no controls put in place to control the contamination on this site. We are early in the process. Stop saying that we've come in late.
And I don't mean any disrespect by that. I was just talking in relation to the number of years we've worked on the site. So that is not my intent to suggest that. So please don't take it that way.
No problem. That's because hardly anything was done for 12 years since the first phase 2 report was released that identified the need for a groundwater collection and treatment system and an active subslab depressurization system, which was also ordered installed by DEP in 2017, and that system was never installed.
Are there any other questions or comments or anything we can try to do?
Yeah, I just want the public here to know that there are 4 scientists now that have evaluated this. 3 are telling us that there's still a problem, and 1 is telling us that we're not. The one that's not is tied in with Mr. Pellegrino, and they have an agenda. They want this property sold. The rest of us, the other 3 and the rest of us, want the people safe.
Who's the
That's
one who's tied in with me?
You're working together. In the very beginning you were.
No, are you referring to
leading
OTO?
you're leading his questions. That's what I'm talking about. He may not be paying you, but you're leading his questions in order to come to a conclusion that everything is fine. There's 3 others that you keep dismissing. And these 3 others, along with the community members, we don't have an agenda. We want this property sold too. All we want is to know that our neighbors are safe, that our land is clean. That's all. Thank you.
So just in response to that, the LSP is here on the line now. He's available and he's able to answer questions. So if whomever these people are, or if you have them, please ask them. That's why he's here, to answer questions, to try to address concerns. So if there are specific questions, please ask them.
Sure, this is Glenn Ayers. I'll ask, why was the groundwater collection and treatment system that was first identified in 2012 and then also identified in 2015 in a study done by Ty and Bond, why was that system never put in place to gain control over the contamination on the site? Why was it not installed? 10 years now. No phase 3 ever done. Why? Why so long to do what was needed 10 years ago? Thank you.
Bruce?
Well, I would say, I don't know about studies you're talking about, pumping groundwater and treating it. That's not really a viable technology. It may be used at times to, control a plume that needs to be controlled, but it's, you might use it in a drinking water area. I just don't see the need for groundwater for plume control here. Frankly, the plume is controlled.
So, Bruce.
Yeah.
This is Lyons Witten.
Okay, Lyons, go ahead.
I'll rephrase the question.
Okay.
Where in the Massachusetts contingency plan does it say that the solution to pollution is dilution?
Right.
Is an okay remedy? Because you're absolutely correct. It is, in your words, fortuitous that the stormwater collection system is the discharge point for groundwater along Kenwood. It is very fortuitous for all the people who live across the street. But where do the contaminants go? You've identified where they aren't, but you haven't identified where they did go. You have a mile of storm sewer that's leaky. It's leaky because that's how the groundwater gets into it. So it must also be leaky where groundwater can get out of it. And so the contaminants at the site are getting into the storm sewer through groundwater, and then they're miraculously disappearing. And that part of the phase 2 hasn't been resolved. So I'd like to see a written response as to where in the MCP it's okay that this situation is allowed to be the final solution for groundwater. And my second suggestion is that a pilot test could be done on the passive system, adding a fan, to simply see how much of an improvement you could have on indoor air quality by adding a fan to the passive system that you did construct. And that could be part of your phase 3. So those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Okay. That question of, you quoted me as saying fortuitous, and I mean, you're right. We followed this system and we put wells, some wells along it to see is it getting out, and what we saw is that we don't think it is. We took, where we had wells, we measured the water in the stormwater and the adjacent groundwater, and it, the stormwater is lower than the adjacent groundwater, so it's getting into the system, and we see a steady decrease in concentrations as we follow that stormwater system until it dissipates completely. That question of is this okay? Is something I wondered. And I early on, before filing the phase 2, tried to get brownfields people to, because I'm curious, is that okay to have it function this way? And I don't know the answer, but so there's that. The idea of a pilot test, putting some fans on the system. I've like a simple radon fan, low voltage, just to see if you get any improvement. It's something that we could try. I think the way it's set up, they go right up through the roof. It's a slate roof. And there's that guidance that says you want to have the positive pressure on a pump on the outside in case there's a leak. How you have the negative on the inside, and then you want your air pump. So they'd have to make more change. I've been up in the attic of this building and seen the pipes that go up, through the roof. And, could you put a radon fan right up against the roof? You'd have positive pressure then. But that's something that, seems like even voluntarily, even saying, this system is good, but, maybe without we're not going to maybe, voluntarily put those fans on. And as your annual check for the passive system, you just make sure they're running. Is that something you could do? If a fan like that stops running, does that create an impediment to the natural passive flow? That'd be a concern. Those are things that I've thought about. I do think that what Attorney Pellegrino says makes sense. Let DEP opine on this, because you've been audited. You can't. It's very difficult to sort of tell what they're going to say in an audit, and you might think you're doing something that improves things, and they may not see it that way. So I would rather have that. And with an AUL, we're guaranteed of an audit. They've already produced, to me, an amazingly comprehensive letter. I don't know if you've taken a look at it. Have you looked at that letter?
It's not up on the public site. At least
it is. It is on the public site.
I'll go find it. And it wasn't when I.
It responds to I guess Councilor Ayers sent a long DEP and message, and John Ziegler responds to it. It's a very detailed letter, and it's very supportive of the work we've done. So you should know that and take a look at it.
I will take a look at it. Another option for the passive system is that you can put a weather vane on
Spinner.
on top of above the roof, and then you don't have the problem of it being an impediment if the electricity
Where does that
goes
go?
out. It does provide those do provide additional suction on the system and
Mr. Wynn, where does that go? Does it go on the
above the roof.
itself?
Yeah, you've probably seen those spinners right
You know, I know
around.
they are, so you're saying you could put one
Yeah.
on it?
So it's
On
above
the-
the roof. So that's
on the pipe above the roof.
Yeah, no, right, I understood it. So you're above, actually in the pipe itself on the top.
and with that building, it would probably look, industrial building. Thought of that too. If DEP audited it and said, we think it'd be a great idea to do something like that.
I mean, that might be an option. That's something we'll look at, Bruce, and let's talk about these. I mean, that's something I haven't heard. That's an interesting option.
It can create more pressure than just natural convective flow, but you've got to have a breeze flowing to do it. And when there isn't a breeze flowing, it might create sort of an impediment. So,
Okay. Yeah, so we got to weigh those pros and cons. Okay. I imagine it's interesting. I haven't heard that, so something to consider. I didn't mean to
that's
cut you
fine.
off.
Lions, does that answer your questions? You're asking, where does it go? And I mean, I think this sewer is a sink all the way. I don't have proof of that, but I think it's a sink all the way. And
I think it's an open question. I don't think the question's actually been answered. You've done some testing. You've done some wells along the sewer. You've done some testing of catch basins, but I still think it's an open question of, and it's, in your words, it's highly fortuitous that it's there, but I don't see how, I don't see where in the MCP it says that it's okay to simply let it dilute and dissipate. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure it says it's not okay. And that's what I'd like. I mean,
It's not. It doesn't say that.
The cost to put in a pump and treat system. I'm sure you do. And do you really, is that money well spent? Would that be money well spent in this case?
I think that you raise valid concerns or issues, and something that I'll discuss with Bruce more. We'll discuss. I think that we try to accomplish those things, but we can take a look at them again in light of your comments. I mean, I don't think you're necessarily trying to be unreasonable. I think that you're trying to raise options or ideas, which is a good thing to do. So I'm not against those things. That I just need to understand them, because I'm not an LSP like you people, and I need to understand what is passive pressure and how it works and what's the likelihood of it and what the cost is, and to go through that whole analysis, and we'll do that. So I do appreciate those comments. I think they're valid comments. Is there any, I know your name's not coming up, so I can't, but the woman away.
Okay, good. That's me. Yeah. Hi, my name is Dorothea Melnikov. I'm in a butter as well. I actually am on both sides. I have a house on Norwood Street and on Kenwood, right across from, it's on 14 Kenwood. It's a house right across from the facility. I'm not sure how actively that side is used, but yeah, I guess I have concerns about the long-term issues related to this plume, and the different kinds of things that might disturb something like that and change the delicate balance there over time. And I'm just wondering, how closely and how transparently will this be monitored, once we've gotten through this process over the years? That's one question. But that question is really related to the plume, and can there be anything to feel more confident that it's not going to cause problems, pollutants to the neighborhood and to the people. I'm also concerned about the employees. Is there any testing that makes sense to do to make sure employees that are there, definitely 40 hours a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, but are they getting followed to make sure that their exposure isn't causing any health concerns? So I guess that's another one of my questions. And my third question, I thank you for your patience, is there any way to use, you see these horrible contaminations that take place, related to, even radioactive materials, et cetera. And they're finding that there is a way to use plants and trees and different things to maybe get those things out of circulation. And I don't know if I'm not expressing this well because I'm first of all, I'm nervous because the Zoom is and these things are a little new to me, but also just looking at different ways to manage this over the long haul are some of my questions.
I can
I have
answer number
grandchildren
2.
on the block too,
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said I have grandchildren on the block too, so I want to make sure they're okay.
Right. Bruce, I think I can address number 2 if you can address 1 and 3. 1, I understand, is the plume issue. 2 and 3 was the use of plants or trees that somehow play an active role in this. 2, I think, was the testing of employees. And I can tell you right now, there is no requirement to test employees or at any of the sites. That's not something that has come up on the radar from any source for something of that nature. But I'll let Bruce answer 1 and 3.
Well, and our testing shows that there's no significant risk to the employees. The concentrations that we've detected. So you're sort of wondering if there could be long-term groundwater monitoring to see if the plume changes or if it begins to, if what we're seeing now changes in the future, I guess is what you're asking. Is that right?
That would be, yeah, accurate.
And there's no plan for that right now. As part of an audit, if DEP were to say, well, we want you to, and I don't see a need for that in the MCP, but I'd like to see what DEP thinks, if they think there's a need for that. I think you're 14, and I know there's a monitoring well right in front of your house that we tested, and we had nothing detected in it, no TCE detected in it. It's well number LS23. And there was the house next door, MW103. The testing in 2019 also contained no TCE. I guess it's maybe phytoremediation. I've heard of that, where plants, are used to pull things out of the ground, and maybe the plants are harvested and then disposed in a landfill or something like that if they pull up metals. I don't think there's a plan to do that, and you would need, this is a paved site, landscaped. I don't see a natural way to do that here. If it was an open field, I've heard of that kind of remediation, but I don't see that as an option. If you were to remediate this, you would probably do an in situ method. The phase 2 talks about that. I got some cost estimates from a company called Regenesis. They specialize in situ remediation methods. And I just wanted injecting probably zero valent iron or some of their compounds to knock down the TCE concentrations. But when you do that, you're usually doing it because you're not at no significant risk. You're trying to get to no significant risk. And so if you're going to do a pretty expensive remediation program like that, you're trying to you have a problem that you're trying to get to no significant risk. And here we feel we are. I think the MCP requires that we, eliminate current exposures and control any future exposures. And that's by installing the subslab or the passive systems. We've eliminated current exposures to no significant risk, and we're controlling potential future exposures with the AUL, saying that there'll be soil management if there's any construction done, and the passive systems will be maintained. And when you do an AUL, the DEP regularly comes and inspects. I've heard them say they're on a schedule of every 2 to 3 years. They usually show up unannounced. If they show up and someone is, got a backhoe and they're digging a hole in the middle of an AUL area and they're not paying attention to their AUL, that's a finable offense. And they come down very aggressively on that. There are not a lot of things they fine for, but that is one of them. So, I'll say that again. If you have a deed restriction that requires soil management and, health and safety plans and things like that, and you ignore that, and the DEP finds out that you've ignored it, they are very, they bring in enforcement and they fine. So that's the plan here.
Can I just add one more question about the water? I mean, is there any, what's happening? Why is it dissipating? Like, is it going just into again, that dilution question, which came to my mind too, or is it going into the treatment plants? Are there any readings, down further that would, be of concern? Or you said it totally goes away, I think. Totally dissipates. So none's getting in the rivers or, that you know of, or really flowing into.
Our testing shows that it's not getting into the river, that it gets into the sewer system. It's shallow groundwater out here. So if the pipe for the sewer is at 5 feet and the groundwater adjacent to it is at 3 feet, it's going to go into that. Most storm sewers have under drain systems so that, they try to collect the storm water from the catch basins above and not so much the groundwater, but they'll have an under drain system. So it's depressing the groundwater table adjacent to that sewer, and it's following it. And we see a progression of lower concentrations as we follow that. And we got, the sewer plans from the Greenfield DPW, so we knew where that sewer goes and could sample the catch basins as it goes towards the river.
Maybe I'm just not scientifically aware enough, but if the TCE goes into the storm sewer system and it just disappears, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what happens to it. Does it go into the system that the town of Greenfield has, and it's pulled out of that system before it goes out of that water before it goes into the river? Because that's where our storm water goes. It goes into Green River. I'm just trying to figure out. There's this chemical. It says that my understanding is it doesn't degrade. What happens to it?
Oh, I think I covered it, but I will say again, I believe it's a combination. It may not degrade, but it does volatilize. So I suspect some of it volatilizes. But if that plume is getting into the storm sewer in the area right next to the building, the rest of the length of the storm sewer is also getting groundwater in it, and that's all clean. So, okay, you have some water getting in there that's got TCE in it, but along the entire length of that sewer, I believe, you're getting additional water added. And so I think it's a combination of some level of volatilization. I mean, going up through the atmosphere, but then and some amount of dilution. So that if it comes into the sewer and it's at 10 parts per million, but a quarter mile down the sewer, a lot of clean water has come in, then it's at 5 parts per million, and then another quarter mile it's at 2 parts per million. That's what I think it's a very reasonable explanation for what's going on. And I don't think there's any treatment of it. I don't think Greenfield has a treatment system for their storm sewer. I don't believe this. I think this just goes to a pipe into the Green River. But when we sampled it there, it's not there. And it's at low concentrations. Their standards for what is sort of okay for a groundwater to go into a surface water. And they assume a certain amount of dilution when that groundwater hits the surface water. And we're way, way below those standards for TCE. So it's not a environmental concern. It's not an ecologic concern, I guess I'd say.
So I'd just like to set 6:30 as a stop time. Let's see, try to utilize the time to let other participants who have questions ask them. And if we have to go, we can go more, but let's try to use 6:30 as a stop time, which is 2.5 hour question process, so we can have, if there's people who haven't spoken yet, let's try to address those people first. I don't know if there's any individuals who have questions who haven't spoken. I'll give you a second to think about it. If you do, just speak up. Okay. If there are no individuals that haven't spoken, are there any individuals that have already spoken that have more follow-up questions?
Yeah, this is Glenn Ayers.
Okay.
Yep. I have read through the regulations, the MCP regulations that you keep referring to, and the goal of this process is to reduce the on-site contamination, especially something like TCE, to the either natural or anthropogenic background levels to the extent feasible. And so, again, this was exposed to be contaminated back in 2012. And the solution at the time was to put in a groundwater collection and treatment system. That was also the suggestion of a report that was done by Ty and Bond in 2015 that was paid for by the FERCOG. And yet here we are in 2022 and no groundwater collection and treatment system has been put in place, which would actually reduce, collect, treat, reduce, and remove that contamination from the groundwater, and it would keep it from migrating off-site, and it would also reduce the amount that is volatilizing into the buildings that you claim is being addressed by your passive vent system. None of that groundwater collection and treatment control has been put in place now for 10 years. And we want to know why that hasn't been done, because what you're proposing to do is jump directly to a permanent solution with a AUL, activities and use limitation. And you have not done a phase 3. You have not put in any sort of contaminant treatment system. And you have not done a phase 4, which would be selecting the treatment system. And you haven't done a phase 5, which would be evaluating if that treatment system is actually functioning the way it was designed to function. So none of those steps have been done. We're still back in the phase 2. And yet you're now claiming that you're going to close out the site. That's what you've said. You want to close out the site with an AUL, but none of the preliminary steps that are necessary have been done at this site. You intend to essentially cover it up, walk away from it, leave that TCE contamination on site, or let it, through your magical thinking, continue to go into the storm drain, and then who knows where it goes after that. Everyone knows that the groundwater here in Greenfield fluctuates up and down during the season dramatically. On that site, it could vary as much as 10 or more feet over the course of the seasons, the year. And so that pipe sometimes is in the water table, that sewer storm drain pipe. Sometimes it's way above the water table and it's not collecting any groundwater at that point. But once that contaminated water leaves the site, it can go through all kinds of areas, including wetlands. It can go through places where it's above the water table, where it can freely leak out, because we know that our sewers and our storm drains in Greenfield, in a lot of cases, are 100 years old, and they leak like sieves. Our wastewater treatment plant goes from a daily flow of 2.5 million up to 15 million when it rains a couple of inches. So we know that we have a very leaky system. So what you're saying here is that your solution to this is to let the contamination continue to migrate off-site, and you essentially don't have any control over that. And that is unacceptable. That is not what the MCP, Mass Contingency Plan, says needs to be done. You need to reduce the contamination on site to natural or anthropogenic background levels. That's it. And why hasn't that been done over the past 10 years, Mr. Nicholson?
You're not completely correct. There's a feasibility aspect of the MCP, which you're not really seeing. So it's to the extent feasible, and they have a guidance on what that means. And so there's a feasibility discussion in the phase 2, and cost is part of that. When you reach no significant risk, they still want you to evaluate the feasibility of approaching or getting to background, and that is in the phase 2. And they have guidance on how you can, whether or not something is feasible. And in this case, looking at the costs and the fact that we're at no significant risk, we can say it's not feasible. It's not unusual within the MCP to close with a permanent solution, after phase 2. It's set up. They actually want you to do proactive remediation early on. They don't really want you to just do the phase 2 comprehensive evaluation, then go to the phase 3 evaluation of remedial alternatives, then the phase 4. If you can do it proactively, as we did here, and as has been done here by EPA and by the work that was done to install the systems, that's what they prefer. So if you can get to no significant risk and evaluate the feasibility at the end of phase 2, and do your risk characterization that shows you're at no significant risk, then that's what you do. You don't continue through phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. And that's, I think, any LSP will tell you that.
Are there any other individuals who have questions?
I do have one more question. I'm not sure, I'm trying to find what page it is on the 734 page report that was filed on 4/6/20. But I have a document here that says estimated EPA contractor cost for the removal action, because we're talking about feasibility. And granted, it does say the accounting of expenditures in this estimate based on figures known to the OSC at the time of the report was written. And anyway, it gives a ceiling, a cost incurred, and a remainder. So the total removal project cost was, ceiling was $840,000. The cost incurred was $507,000. The remainder was $333,000. So we're talking about feasibility. Do either of you know where that money is, and can we use that money?
Bruce, do you know what page she's talking about? Like, I'm trying to find it.
Are you looking in the body of the report itself? Or I know that there's an appendix that has cost information towards the end of the report from Regenesis, and then
Yeah, I don't.
Bruce and Rayford, this is pretty early on in the report, page 22 or 23, I believe.
Okay, because I was looking at 29.
I think it might also be later, or that might just be that might be the table of contents. I'm looking at figures similar to what was just said on
Okay, so let's assume for
page 220 of the report.
let's assume for discussion purposes. Hang on, I gotta. For discussion purposes, that you're accurate. I'm not aware of like one somewhere to draw from in that regard. If that's your question.
Was it in the lease with 401 Liberty that if costs over 300,000 or there was something to that effect? I don't have the lease in front of me that would be given back to the town, and it just happened to be that there were 332,000. So was that given back to the town? Do you know that?
No. If there's and I don't have it in front of me, but if there's cost over a certain amount, the purchase price changes. And there was a CPA documented things that went with your prior mayor. They did their review of it, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, but there's a cost shifting in the option, which has already been exceeded by plenty. So we're way past that barrier. If there are additional costs,
330,000, 33,000 is now gone at this point. Like we're talking about feasibility, certain things weren't done because of cost. It wasn't feasible, but it may not sound like a lot to you, but it sounds like a lot to me. $333,000.
it sounds like a real lot to me. I'm not going to argue that point. No, I guess I'm not following. I guess if I understood your question, maybe I misunderstood it. You asked two questions. The first one was in the report. You're saying, okay, there was an estimate of about 800,000, 500 was spent roughly, and there's another 300,000 that has a possibility of additional estimates. With regards to, then you asked the second question with the lease. So let me try to answer it in reverse order. There's a lease with an option that has a stated amount in there, and I don't recall exactly what it was, but you said 300,000. It could be in that vicinity. 401 was responsible to pay remediation costs up to a level, and that offset the part of the purchase price. Because at the beginning, nobody knew if it's going to be $3 million, $2,800,000 as was characterized in this, from what you're reading in this report. I don't know what year this was. Hang on a minute.
Right. I guess what I'm saying was why were certain things not done based on it wasn't feasible. There were certain actions.
Now I understand your question. Yeah.
And now there's 333,000 left, but there could have been I'm sorry. Okay. Please go ahead.
So I think respectfully, you might be confusing the two. What that's saying in the 2020 report you're looking at is saying that these were the some of the estimated costs. This is what's been spent of those, and this is how we've done it. Because you go about in each decision that we have, the LSP comes to us and says, "Hey, I'd like to do this. This is what we're recommending. This is what we'd like to do." We try to get cost estimates and say, "Yes, we have to do that." Or I maybe have this alternative one, which is more cost effective. Try this one, and that's kind of the process that we went through. Does that? And there's no set amount of money anywhere to like go draw from a grant or something like that. In fact,
right.
In addition to this, there was about.
How did that offset the cost?
Well, hold on. In addition to this, there was a bunch of grant money EPA used and did that added to what was done there. So the amount was done even greater than those numbers, the total work. If I understand the question, I may not be accurate.
For example, the active system could have been put in along with the monitoring, which they said, granted over and I'm just going by memory on this, approximately $200,000 for ongoing monitoring, anticipating a 20-year.
Absolutely agree.
There was a certain amount, and so the cost-effective way was a passive system, and so that we kind of went around all the monitoring costs, but yet there's this money left over. So that's kind of where, and please, if I'm if I'm misunderstanding that, please.
Yeah, let me try to respond to that. I thought we were clear about this at the beginning, but let me try to. I don't disagree with you that an active system is another option, and that I feel that the passive system actually ended up costing more, and we think it works better. The question that and I can't recall his name, was Mr. Witten, Lloyd, I believe his first name was, raised as well. Could you add some type of active system to the passive system now? We were talking about cost effective of that. And that's not a huge number like 200,000. I understand to be a much lower number. So we didn't say, let's do a passive as opposed to active because it saved us money. We were going to, and we could have drawn from somewhere. The 300,000 is just money that wasn't incurred during this process, but there's other money that wasn't included in that. So, I mean, I don't know the total cost because we didn't pay for it all. EPA paid for it, DEP paid. So it's probably greater than that number. But the 800 is not like a pocket of money that anybody's entitled to. 401 doesn't get to keep 300,000 extra. The city doesn't pocket 300,000. You know.
But it comes off the cost of the property, right? Is that what you were?
No, I'm not. I don't think I'm following.
Okay, that's okay. I may be mistaken. I thought it was, you said it was it offset the purchase price.
With it at the beginning, but it was like once we spent over a certain amount of money, and I don't remember what, it was like 200,000, but we've been past that for a long time. So it doesn't matter after that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions? We got a few more minutes here. I think we addressed a lot of the questions.
Hi, this is Pamela Goodwin. I have one quick question or statement. 1 second. I won a case with the Architectural Access Board against Department of Housing and Community Development and a housing authority. And it was 2016, and we're still not done with this, but over and over, they came in and said it's not feasible and we don't have the money. And the board heard it. I can't even tell you how many times we had to go back over it, testify. And so I just want to point out, there's a difference between whether something is feasible that is different from any monetary expense. At least it was for that. So I don't want people to be confused with what's feasible. And we did win the case, and they are going to have to do it. And they kept saying, there's no money, you can't do this. And so I'll just leave it at that. I don't want people to think feasibility is one and the same of a monetary issue. Thank you.
I'm just trying to understand your comment. I don't think we're saying that. I think I understand the distinction you're making, and I understand your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Two different things, and I had to address each of those issues over and over again. They still lost the case.
No, I can't comment to that case. I think I understand the distinction you're trying to make.
I'm just doing it for a point of clarification. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Got a couple more minutes. Are there any other questions?
Yep. This is Glenn Ayers. I would request that you make the draft AUL, Activities and Use Limitation opinion from OTO, available for public review.
We do plan on issuing that, and we plan on doing
before it's recorded.
Absolutely, we do. We're already doing that.
Okay, and my final question is, why has the LSP asked for a 6-month extension on preparation of a phase 3 when he just previously said that often sites are closed after a phase 2? Yet he's asked DEP for a 6-month extension, which just coincidentally was requested the day after we filed the PIP petition.
Because
so he filed that on December 2nd.
Right. That was more at when a PIP is filed, it would be, I think, imprudent to try to close out a site without listening to the concerns and trying to, go through the PIP process. So I think that, out of respect for this process, I think that explains why we requested an extension. I mean, we don't know how long the PIP process would take. So I think 6 months was something we thought was reasonable. Okay. I think that
I have a question, actually. This is
Sure.
Counselor Bullock. I'm wondering if there's been any kind of survey done beyond just the water samples to actual, like, people in the community and children in the community to see if there is an increased of diseases that are associated with TCEs, especially knowing like what I have read in digging through this stuff. I've only been on the council. This is my second month. So I'm just digging into this issue, but that, you know, mothers and children, early childhood exposure is a higher risk for the associated diseases like autoimmune disease, childhood leukemia, those sort of things. So I am wondering if there is surveillance that's been conducted or is planned, or if, you know, that, do we know, is there an increased level of people that have these sorts of diseases in that area?
So to answer, I know it's kind of a few-part question and a fair question. We're not aware of any increase. It's never been brought to our attention. I don't even know how they would even test something of that nature, but it's not something that we've done during this process. I don't know what the Department of Health has done. And I do know at one point, at the beginning process, there were community people who were involved in you know, asking questions like that or inquiring, but I'm not aware of anything. And nothing in the data suggests, and Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, that we take further steps in that direction, because I'm sure you would have raised it to us, but please tell me. I think you're on mute.
There you go. No, nothing in the data suggests, I guess, a need for that, but I can tell you of a case I'm familiar with in another part of the state where there's a TCE plume and concerned residents, and there was a request to, I think it was the Department of Public Health who actually did a study like that. They wanted to see if there was a cluster. They didn't find that there was, but that's how that was done. It's not something that we as an environmental consulting firm or as an LSP would do, but I've seen it done, I'd say.
That's helpful. And you know, the last thing that I want to say, I know we're past time here, is just that I did have a number of constituents reach out to me of family members who work, live, get care at the former LUNT site. And I do urge you to really listen, that this is a concern, and it has been a concern of many people that have followed this for years. You know, there was bells ringing when the answer was that I think Susan asked, like, where do these TCEs go? Like, where do they go? And the question is, like, it sounds like they don't go anywhere, right? Like, I'm familiar with PCBs from studies I did in college about like mother's breast milk and PCB concentration in breast milk. And those don't go anywhere. They have to be dredged up and taken out and fully remediated. And so there was bells ringing for me that the idea is that this dissipates into our river, which is our drinking water, which I went ice fishing with my kids on Sunday. Like, we eat the fish, we drink the water, we live here in this community. And
But
so I do.
Counselor, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't think that's accurate. What he said is it doesn't dissipate into the river. He said that its channels in, they tested at that, there's nothing going into the river.
My understanding was how I interpreted what you were saying is that it is it's diluted. So when you're testing with the fresh water that's running in, that the amounts are diluted.
Yep. Diluted to the point where it's not detectable, you know. So we're talking, if we're measuring part per billion concentrations, and by the time we get to the river, we can't detect it. You know, a laboratory can't even see if it's there. You know,
Right now, but if we don't get rid of the source of the TCEs that are in this site, aren't these TCEs going to continue to run off into our river and into our drinking water?
No, that was the point we were trying to make at the outset, that because of EPA's involvement and the magnitude of the contaminants they removed, it decreased such a magnitude that there's that it's less and less, not more and more.
Nobody's drinking water with TCE from the site. There's no drinking water source near here. I don't. That's not an exposure pathway of concern.
Mm-hmm. So if we're testing the TCEs that are running into the drainage system and into the river, it's not an issue that there is still some level of TCEs on that site that is not remediated.
It's not an issue.
That's correct. And I'm sorry, sir, I don't know your name. I know you had your hand up.
Hi, I'm Norm Hirschfeld. I used to be a counselor for 7.5 years, and I would really request a thorough investigation, really, of the air inside Building B. I think for you not to do this is really bad. It's I used to work at General Electric in Lynn, and we were exposed to TC trichloroethylene, and it's bad. It's not something that someone who has a compromised liver, which many of these residents may have, it's not going to help them at all. It's something that you may not show direct cause and effect, at least over quite a few years. But for long-term effect, you really want a clean building. You don't want people to get contaminated in it. This is a really important facility, not only for Greenfield, but for the whole region. We really need it, but we need it clean, and we need a clean environment around it. So I would suggest to the counselors that you really need to push that this building be clean, that the process be followed as closely as possible, and that you don't let this be a site that will come back and bite both the clients, the staff, and the city. It is your duty to make sure it's a good site. We were told that this would be a clean site when it was being developed, and that there was no leakage. But this doesn't show. The figures are such that if you look at the 2018 figures, especially the building B, it's really bad. So you really don't want these clients in this building to be the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. We don't want this to really be something that's going to really affect people's health. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that, I think we're going to bring the meeting to a close. I thank you all for your participation. We will circulate that the draft PIP. We will formulate written questions, answers to the questions. And again, thank you all for your participation.
With that in mind, Rafer, I'd just like to direct folks to the beginning of the chat. I put my email address in there. If you haven't received a copy of the PIP, or if you have any other questions or want to send written questions to me, to be addressed, with the final copy of the PIP at some point in the future, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.